My name is Reed. I'm 24, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a very specific idea of how I should live my life. My mother, in particular, has always had this way of twisting everything into a lecture about gratitude and obligation, though most of the time it just felt like control. She has this sharp, sneering tone that makes you feel wrong for even breathing the wrong way, and my younger sister, Charlotte, has never missed a chance to get in on it, always lurking in the background like she's waiting to swoop in with a perfectly timed insult. Growing up, I tried to follow the rules, tried to be the good kid, get decent grades, get a stable job, pay my dues, but it never mattered. It was never enough. I could barely keep a breath in my lungs before she'd find some reason to lecture me about being ungrateful or selfish. The tipping point, I guess, came when I turned 24 and was finally tired of bending under their expectations. I was working a decent job, had saved up a bit of money, and had a plan to eventually move out, but the walls of their house felt suffocating. One evening, my mom cornered me in the living room. That familiar sharpness in her voice, the one that makes you feel like every word is a judgment. "You think you're independent now, Reed?" she said, pacing like she owned the air itself. "Then start acting like it. Pay me rent. Cover your sister's bills. Stop living off my kindness." She paused, letting the words sink in, letting the room feel like it was closing in on me. Charlotte, of course, was perched on the couch like a cat waiting for a fight, smirking at the drama. I just smiled. I don't even know why. I guess it was the only way to keep myself from saying something I'd regret. "Sure, Mom," I said quietly, the kind of calm that makes people think you've accepted the world on their terms. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing me for a second, and went back to her papers, muttering about responsibility and gratitude under her breath. I didn't need to argue. I had a plan, and it had nothing to do with her definitions of independence. For months, I quietly started putting it into motion. I spent nights in the garage, hours tinkering and building, making sure that whatever I was working on stayed completely hidden. I won't lie, it wasn't easy. Between my day job, the constant nagging from home, and keeping Charlotte from noticing anything, I had to be careful, strategic, almost surgical in how I carved out my time. Every screw I tightened, every board I cut, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been swallowed by their expectations for years. The project was my little rebellion, but also a test, a way to prove, first to myself and then to them, that I could exist on my own terms. Of course, tensions in the house didn't get any better. Mom seemed to take more pleasure in pointing out my supposed failures. Bills were a constant battle. "You still haven't covered the electricity for the month," she'd say, voice sharp enough to cut through concrete, even though I was covering my part quietly, without fanfare. Charlotte would chime in, laughing like she found it hilarious that I was struggling while she floated through life without a worry. It was infuriating, watching them count on me to clean up their messes, yet never acknowledging that I had a life, a plan, a brain that didn't revolve around catering to their whims. And then came the comment that finally lit the fuse. One Saturday, Mom called me into the kitchen while I was grabbing coffee. "You're not really independent yet, Reed," she said, stirring her tea like she was trying to mix the words into me. "An independent adult doesn't need me to tell them what's owed. They know. They pay up. They pull their weight. Not like you, living in my house for free, hoping I won't notice your failures." I felt my stomach tighten, not because I was scared, but because I was furious in the way you can only be when someone underestimates you completely. She had no idea how close I was to proving her completely wrong. That evening, after she went to bed, I stayed in the garage, my sanctuary. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and oil, the only smells in the house that didn't come with judgment or demands. Every piece of the project was coming together, and I realized something important. They couldn't see it yet. They had no idea what I was capable of. They assumed I was weak, dependent, and naive. But every day, I was building my proof, my escape, and the day I revealed it would be the day the balance shifted completely. And then, just as I was finishing a tricky part of the build, I heard the sound of the garage door opening unexpectedly. My heart skipped, because the one person who could ruin everything had arrived. My uncle, who often borrowed tools and somehow always got a pass for barging in unannounced. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for him to notice. He stepped inside, and I could see him pause mid-step, eyes wide, jaw dropping. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking around, taking in what I had built in secret. And in that moment, I realized the first domino had fallen. He was speechless. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how I had pulled this off without anyone noticing. It was exactly the reaction I had hoped for, but I also knew it was dangerous. If he went running to my mother or Charlotte, my months of careful planning could come crashing down before I had the chance to fully reveal what I'd done. I had to think fast, decide how to control this, how to make sure the next steps went exactly the way I envisioned. The tension in the garage was thick, almost suffocating. Every second that passed, I felt the weight of their expectations, their assumptions, pressing down. But now, for the first time, I had power. Real power. The kind that didn't need permission or approval. After that night in the garage, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. Seeing my uncle's shock reminded me how long I had been underestimated, how carefully I'd hidden my capabilities just to survive under my mother's thumb. I didn't say a word at the time. He didn't need an explanation yet, but I knew that moment was a turning point. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just the kid she could nag endlessly, the punching bag she could parade Charlotte in front of as a model daughter. I had a secret weapon now, and every interaction with my family after that night felt charged, like I was walking through a house full of sleeping grenades, waiting to see which one would explode first. The days that followed were a blur of the usual insults and manipulations. Only now, I noticed how clearly my mother played favorites. Charlotte got every break imaginable. She could leave chores half-finished, ignore schoolwork, and when Mom noticed, it was always a sigh and a half-hearted, "Make sure you fix it later." Meanwhile, I was micromanaged, questioned at every turn, and scolded for even the tiniest oversight. One evening, I tried to relax in the living room with my laptop, finishing some freelance work for extra income. Mom came over, arms crossed, her eyes scanning my screen. "Reed, do you really think you can just sit there while your sister needs money for her car insurance?" she said sharply, her voice like knives. "You're 24. Independent adults prioritize family. And yet here you are, selfishly working on whatever frivolous projects you're obsessed with." I closed the laptop slowly, feeling the familiar sting of injustice. My hands were shaking a little, not with fear, but with rage. Charlotte strolled into the room, plopped onto the couch, and smirked at me. "Don't mind Mom, Reed. She's just jealous you don't get it right," she said, flipping her hair back like this whole situation was a joke. My mother laughed lightly, and I felt something inside me tighten. They didn't see it. They could never see it, that I wasn't the problem. I was a person with boundaries, with skills, with ambition. I had a plan, and every time they tried to belittle me, I tucked that fire back inside and let it burn quietly. I tried to keep my focus on my project and my savings, but the constant barrage of demands was exhausting. Bills, chores, errands. Mom somehow had a way of piling on responsibility and framing it like it was my personal failure if I couldn't keep up. And the worst part was Charlotte's entitlement. She would demand things openly, expect Mom to cater to her whims, and I'd be the one left footing the invisible bills, cleaning up invisible messes, answering questions that weren't mine to answer. One afternoon, I discovered she had borrowed $200 from my savings to pay for some boutique clothing she decided she couldn't live without. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I watched and waited, making a note of every slight, every unfair expectation, every time I was punished for something I didn't even do. I was keeping a mental ledger, one I would one day use to remind them who I really was. It all came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I had worked a 12-hour shift and come home exhausted, hoping to grab a quiet moment before Mom and Charlotte started in on the usual barrage of critiques. I walked into the kitchen to find Mom and Charlotte laughing over what I immediately realized was a financial statement. My heart sank before I even heard the details. Apparently, Charlotte had convinced Mom that she needed a loan, a sizable one, for a business idea she had been dreaming up. I didn't even know what the idea was, and honestly, I didn't care. What I cared about was that Mom didn't even hesitate, didn't ask any questions, just wrote the check from my joint savings account, the one I had been slowly building for months. "Mom, wait, that's my account," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I thought we were using our separate funds." Mom waved her hand dismissively, not even looking up. "Reed, don't be ridiculous. It's all part of being a family. You're independent now, remember? Independent adults support their family. And this is your sister's business. She deserves a head start. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I couldn't believe it. Every ounce of restraint I had been holding together snapped. You can't just take my money without asking. I shouted, my voice rising more than I intended. Charlotte smirked again, glancing between us like I was the unreasonable one. Relax, Reed. She's helping me. Don't be dramatic, she said casually. I stepped closer to Mom, trying to keep my cool, though my fists clenched at my sides. Helping her? You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. That's my money I earned. This isn't okay. You've crossed a line. Mom rolled her eyes, as though my words were nothing more than the whining of a child. Reed, you're overreacting. She's your sister. This is what adults do. You're learning responsibility. Stop thinking only of yourself. Responsibility. That word echoed in my mind. It wasn't responsibility. They were calling my self-respect and my hard work selfishness. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the garage under the dim light, staring at what I had built, thinking about how long I had endured this, how long I had put my dreams on hold, how many times my boundaries had been ignored, and realized I couldn't take it anymore. Then came the betrayal that truly broke me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the favoritism. It was the fact that my mother had been secretly feeding Charlotte information about my savings, my work schedule, my hours spent on my project. I had noticed some things missing from my materials, a tool gone here, a notebook left open there, but I had assumed it was accidental. It wasn't. One day, I overheard a conversation in the living room. Mom was telling Charlotte exactly how much I had saved, what I had been working on, and when I was alone. She was guiding her, almost gleefully, in how to take advantage of me. I couldn't move. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization sank in. Everything I had thought I was keeping private, everything I had been building in secret, had been compromised by the person I trusted most in this world. The person who was supposed to love me unconditionally had deliberately handed me over to the very person she had groomed to exploit me. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. True, helpless rage. After that, nothing in the house felt safe. I started locking things up, hiding what I could, even being more secretive with the hours I spent on my project. I could feel my mother's eyes on me constantly, trying to gauge my mood, waiting for a slip. And Charlotte, of course, seemed to sense my frustration and took delight in pushing every button she could find. She would casually mention my savings in conversation, hint at my plans, all while smiling like she was completely innocent. The cruelty of it, the deliberate targeting, it was almost cinematic. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but my patience was running out. The final straw came one evening when I returned home after a particularly grueling week at work. I had managed to save enough from my freelance projects to buy some specialized parts for my garage project, a set of tools I'd been dreaming of for months. I left them in a box in my room, planning to install them later that night. When I came back, the box was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced it. Then I saw Charlotte sneaking out of the garage, clutching the tools. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she froze. Charlotte, what are you doing with that? I asked, voice low but sharp, almost trembling with anger. She shrugged, still grinning. Just borrowing them, Reed. Don't get so worked up. I felt my world tilt. I realized in that moment that the subtle undermining, the favoritism, the secret betrayals, all of it, had been building to this. She had crossed the line. And worse, Mom would either approve or, worse, turn it back on me as evidence of my supposed selfishness when I finally reacted. That night, I went back to the garage, sat down in the quiet, and let my anger simmer. For the first time, I didn't just feel frustrated or mistreated. I felt like a volcano, and everything they had done was fuel for the eruption I knew was coming. I spent hours pacing, planning, thinking about how I could reclaim what was mine, how I could finally make them see that I wasn't their pawn. The betrayal had shifted something fundamental in me. Before, I had been trying to survive their control. Now, I realized I wanted something more. I wanted justice, acknowledgement, and a victory that would be undeniable. The garage project had always been a personal test, but now it was a weapon, a secret I could unleash to change the entire dynamic in the house. After the tool incident, I felt like I had hit rock bottom. I'd always known my family could be cruel, manipulative, and selfish, but seeing it so clearly, the deliberate undermining, the secret betrayals, made me feel small in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid. I spent a few days in a haze, moving mechanically through the house, avoiding Mom and Charlotte as much as I could. I barely spoke, barely ate, and certainly didn't acknowledge their constant commentary about my attitude problems. Every little word from them was a reminder of how trapped I felt, how powerless I had been for so long. My confidence, which I had always kept buried but alive like a candle in the wind, flickered dangerously close to being extinguished. For the first time in years, I considered giving up on the project altogether. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe they were right. I was just a kid playing at independence while they were the adults in charge. But then I remembered the look on my uncle's face. The way he had paused, speechless, when he saw what I had built in the garage. That moment had felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as I had been led to believe. It wasn't about proving Mom or Charlotte wrong, not exactly. It was about proving to myself that I could create, that I could build, that I could succeed even when no one else believed in me. That was the thought that broke me out of my stupor. If I gave up, they had won, and I wasn't ready to give them that satisfaction. So I started slowly. I began by reclaiming my space. I locked the garage more securely, invested in a few small security measures to make sure nothing could be stolen or tampered with again. I reorganized my tools, my materials, and even my schedule. I set strict boundaries for myself, creating clear work hours that Mom and Charlotte couldn't interfere with. It was small, almost invisible steps, but each one gave me a tiny spark of control, a reminder that I could dictate my own life if I chose to. Next came the financial rebuilding. I went through my accounts, canceled shared access, and made sure every dollar I had saved was untouchable. No more sneaky withdrawals, no more family emergencies used as excuses for theft. I found a freelance gig that allowed me to work evenings and weekends, earning just enough to replace what had been taken and then some. I kept it quiet, never announcing my progress, never letting them know how serious I was about securing my independence. There was a certain satisfaction in watching my savings grow without interference, like planting seeds in secret and knowing that one day they'd bloom in my own time. Emotionally, I had to rebuild too. I began spending time alone in the garage, not just working, but thinking, planning, reflecting. I realized I had spent so much of my life defining myself by their expectations that I didn't even remember what it felt like to exist solely for myself. I started small, reading, exercising, experimenting with new skills. Every time I accomplished something, even if it was minor, it was a victory. Every small step was a reminder that my value wasn't determined by Mom's sneers or Charlotte's smirks. I was more than their criticism, more than their manipulations. And then came the breakthrough. One evening, after weeks of careful planning and secret work, I finished a major addition to my project in the garage, a structure that wasn't just functional, but impressive. I stepped back, running my hands over the finished work, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Pure, unfiltered pride. I had built this with my own hands, with my own vision, and without asking permission from anyone who had spent years trying to convince me I wasn't capable. It was a tangible reminder that I could create, control, and achieve independently of their constant judgment. With that renewed confidence, I began to expand my reach. I started looking into ways to monetize my skills, quietly networking online, researching options for launching my own small business. I wanted a venture that was mine, completely separate from the world that had tried to keep me small. I spent evenings studying, connecting with potential collaborators, and learning skills I had always wanted to master, but had been told weren't practical or suitable. Every step was deliberate, a quiet rebellion against the narrative my family had written for me. At the same time, I kept my interactions with Mom and Charlotte carefully measured. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter or struggle. I didn't argue, I didn't fight, and I certainly didn't beg. I learned to respond with calm, measured statements, the kind that sounded compliant but carried an invisible edge. Sure, I'll take care of it, I'd say about bills or chores, while secretly calculating how to protect my resources and time. I became a master of invisibility, moving around their scrutiny like a shadow, unnoticed but fully aware. The tension in the house escalated naturally. Mom grew more insistent, more controlling, sensing, perhaps, that I was slipping through her fingers. She started micromanaging even the tiniest tasks, criticizing how I folded laundry, how I prepared meals, how I spent my time. Charlotte sensed the change too. She tried new methods to undermine me, sneaky comments meant to provoke, comparisons meant to make me feel inadequate. But now, instead of breaking, I absorbed it, noting every action, every word, and turning it into fuel for my own plans. One night, after a particularly tense exchange, I retreated to the garage and found a strange sense of calm. For years, I had been reacting to their whims, trying to survive in a house that felt like a minefield. Now, I was proactive. I was building not just a project, but a future where their opinions didn't matter. I began visualizing what would happen when the reveal finally came. The moment they realized that I had been quietly reclaiming my power, that I had been preparing to show them I wasn't dependent, weak, or naive. I imagined their faces, shocked and speechless, unable to deny my capabilities. I imagined the satisfaction of standing tall, fully in control of my life, knowing that they could no longer manipulate or belittle me. And yet, I had to be patient. This wasn't about instant gratification. This was a slow, deliberate climb, one that required precision, timing, and restraint. I couldn't let anger or impatience ruin the careful work I had done. Every interaction was a chess move. Every reaction I withheld, every smile I faked, every task I completed under their nose was a step closer to the ultimate goal. In a way, this period of rebuilding became almost therapeutic. I discovered strengths I hadn't known I had. I learned to trust myself, to rely on my own judgment, and to prioritize my own goals over the constant demands of people who didn't respect me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of agency. I was no longer the kid cowering under mom's voice or tiptoeing around Charlotte's whims. I was becoming someone else entirely, someone independent, capable, and quietly unstoppable. But just as I was settling into this new rhythm, a subtle but unmistakable shift began. Mom started sniffing around the garage more frequently, pretending it was casual curiosity, but really testing boundaries. Charlotte began asking more pointed questions, almost as if she was trying to uncover what I had been hiding. The walls of the house seemed to close in again, but this time I wasn't scared. I was aware. Every step I took was deliberate, and I was ready to protect what I had built. I knew the next phase would be critical. The project in the garage was no longer just a personal achievement. It was a symbol of my independence, my competence, and my resilience. And as I lay awake one night, listening to the house settle around me, I realized that the stage was set. The family who had undermined, belittled, and betrayed me for years was about to discover that the kid they thought they controlled had been quietly planning a comeback, a rise that they would never see coming. And yet, I didn't reveal anything yet. Patience, I reminded myself. Timing was everything. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I had survived their manipulation, rebuilt my life, and gained skills, confidence, and control. But the final act, the one that would finally tip the balance in my favor, had not yet begun. The stage was set. The pieces were in place. And I, for the first time in my life, felt fully, terrifyingly ready. By the time I entered what I now call the setup phase, I felt almost unstoppable. The months of quiet rebuilding, of carefully reclaiming control over my finances, my space, and my mental state, had paid off. I knew what I wanted, and more importantly, I knew exactly how I was going to get it. For years, I had let my family dictate my life, manipulate my emotions, and steal my time, energy, and money. But now, the game had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was strategizing. Every move I made was calculated. Every smile I faked, and every polite response I gave was part of a larger plan. The first step was securing my base of operations, the garage. Over the past few months, it had become more than just a workshop. It was my sanctuary, my lab, my fortress. I spent hours organizing tools, refining my project, and adding layers of security. I installed a discrete lock system and rearranged my workspace so that anything valuable or crucial was out of immediate sight. I wanted to ensure that the only person who had complete access to my work was me. Every time Mom or Charlotte wandered near, I acted casual, almost indifferent, but my eyes constantly scanned, analyzing every reaction, every curiosity. I wasn't paranoid. I was vigilant. At the same time, I began gathering my allies, though not in the traditional sense. I didn't need anyone in the house on my side. They were too entrenched in their sense of entitlement and favoritism. Instead, I reached out to old friends and colleagues I trusted, the few people in my life who had always encouraged my independence. I quietly shared ideas with them, asking for advice on my project and discussing potential ways to turn it into something bigger. I was careful to never mention the family situation explicitly, but through these conversations, I realized I wasn't as isolated as I had sometimes felt. Other people saw my abilities, my drive, and my potential. It was a reminder that the small, seemingly invisible victories I had been building weren't meaningless. They were proof of my capability. Meanwhile, the house remained a minefield. Mom had grown suspicious, though she had no concrete evidence of what I was up to. Her inspections became more frequent, her questions more pointed, as if she sensed I was plotting something but didn't know what. Charlotte, for her part, seemed emboldened by her mother's vigilance. She would occasionally sneak into the garage just to see what I was doing, always pretending curiosity but really probing for weaknesses. I had learned to handle them both with a combination of feigned obedience and subtle misdirection. When Mom asked if I had finished a chore or paid a bill, I would answer affirmatively, even if I had done it in a way that didn't inconvenience me at all. When Charlotte tried to sneak into my workspace, I allowed her to see the surface of things while keeping the critical parts hidden. Every interaction was a test, and I was always 3 steps ahead. I also began refining the narrative I would use when the time came to reveal everything. I needed Mom and Charlotte to see not just the physical results of my work, but the meticulous planning, the foresight, and the independence I had cultivated. I wanted them to understand that every act of control, every betrayal, every slight they had ever committed against me had been absorbed and turned into fuel for this moment. The reveal couldn't just be dramatic. It had to be undeniable, leaving them no room for excuses or reinterpretation. Part of my preparation involved psychological warfare, though I didn't think of it in those terms at first. I started planting small, seemingly innocuous hints that something was happening. A tool left slightly out of place, a casual mention of a project in conversation, an accidental slip about my schedule. Nothing concrete, nothing they could accuse me of hiding, but enough to make them uneasy, to make them think that perhaps they weren't in control. I wanted tension to build organically, so that by the time the reveal came, the impact would be magnified. Financial independence was another critical element. I had rebuilt my savings, invested carefully, and set up a few separate accounts that neither Mom nor Charlotte could touch. Every dollar I earned from freelance work or side projects went directly into this new fund. It wasn't just about security, it was about creating leverage. When the moment arrived, I would have resources to make my independence tangible. Proof that I wasn't just talking, proof that I had built a life outside of their manipulation. Emotionally, I had to prepare as well. I spent long nights alone, pacing the garage, imagining their reactions to my eventual reveal. I visualized Mom's eyes widening in disbelief, Charlotte's smirk faltering, the way their voices would catch in their throats when confronted with undeniable evidence of my autonomy. It was almost addictive, the idea of watching years of condescension and manipulation crumble in real time. But I also reminded myself to stay calm, to be patient, to wait for the perfect opportunity. One false move, one slip of the tongue, and everything could be ruined. Timing was everything. The week of preparation was intense. I mapped out routines, schedules, and potential interruptions. I considered every scenario. What if Mom decided to snoop during the day? What if Charlotte tried to sabotage the project? What if someone else unexpectedly came over and saw it before I was ready? For each scenario, I had a response planned, contingencies laid out, and backup measures in place. It was exhausting, but there was a thrill to it too, a feeling of control I had never experienced before. For once, I was not a passive participant in my own life. I was the architect of my fate. Even small victories along the way fueled my momentum. Every night, I locked the garage and stepped back to admire the project. Every dollar I deposited into my protected accounts, every sly, controlled response to Mom or Charlotte's provocations. It all felt like laying bricks in the foundation of my ultimate triumph. And as I worked, I realized that this process wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my identity, and my right to exist outside the toxic orbit of my family. Then came the subtle changes in their behavior. Mom started monitoring me more closely, her questions about money and chores more precise, almost calculating. She seemed to sense that something was coming but couldn't pinpoint it, and it drove her a little insane. Charlotte, sensing the tension, became more reckless, pushing boundaries more openly, teasing me with comments meant to provoke. But I stayed calm, collected, and completely invisible. Every response I gave, every move I made, was part of the setup. I wasn't angry, I was focused. And then the perfect opportunity presented itself, though I didn't realize it at first. It was a Saturday morning, and Mom had left early to run errands. Charlotte, of course, had a lazy start, still lounging in bed when I quietly slipped into the garage. For the first time, I felt the rhythm of the plan sinking perfectly. No interruptions, no prying eyes, no accidental disclosures. It was my moment to finalize the preparations, to put the finishing touches on the project that would finally allow me to take control. As I worked, I thought about how long I had been patient, how long I had endured their constant manipulation and favoritism. I thought about every stolen dollar, every sneering comment, every comparison to Charlotte that had made me feel small. And I realized that none of it mattered anymore. I had transformed that frustration, that pain, that sense of inadequacy, into a weapon I would wield with precision and care. By the end of the day, everything was ready. The garage was immaculate, the project complete, and every contingency accounted for. I sat back on a stool, my hands dirty, muscles sore, but my mind sharper than it had ever been. I could hear the house around me, Mom's car pulling back into the driveway, Charlotte's footsteps echoing in the hallway. And for the first time, I felt the tension shift. I knew the moment of truth was coming. The moment when everything I had worked for would finally collide with the oblivious arrogance of the people who had tried to control me my entire life. And I waited. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. I woke up early, the house still silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. Everything was ready, the garage prepped, the project polished, and my nerves surprisingly calm. I realized I hadn't felt this level of control in my entire life, not even in my most confident moments at work or among friends. Today, everything would change. Not because I shouted, not because I demanded it, but because I had prepared meticulously, quietly, and deliberately. I started with the subtle moves, setting the stage. Charlotte, of course, had no idea. She was still asleep, sprawled across her bed, her phone beside her, oblivious to what was coming. Mom had left for her morning errands, and I made sure the timing was perfect. I checked the locks, double-checked the layout of the garage, and adjusted the final components of the project. Every tool, every material, every detail had its place, calculated to impress and overwhelm. I wasn't just revealing a project. I was revealing months of strategy, patience, and independence, all of it built without their knowledge, without their interference, in spite of them. When Mom returned, she was her usual sharp, dismissive self, carrying grocery bags as if she was proving she ran the house. Charlotte wandered into the kitchen, yawning and stretching, already rehearsing some new complaint about me being lazy or selfish. I waited until the tension was at its peak, until their combined arrogance and ignorance made them the perfect audience. "Mom," I said casually, "can you come see something in the garage?" Mom froze mid-step, grocery bags dangling. "In the garage? What is it now, Reed? Another one of your childish projects?" she said, voice laced with skepticism. Charlotte perked up, intrigued, and followed us without a word, sensing something unusual but unable to articulate it. I led them down the hallway, feeling the calm surge inside me. For months, I had imagined this exact moment. Their disbelief, their shock, the sudden realization that they were not in control. I opened the garage door slowly, letting them step inside. And then I waited. They froze. The project sprawled across the garage was more than just impressive, it was monumental. A fully functioning workshop with custom-built machinery, perfectly organized stations, and even a few automated systems I had engineered myself. Tools were neatly labeled and stored. Small innovations I had designed were mounted strategically, and a corner of the garage displayed a financial ledger, showing the exact growth of my savings, investments, and freelance earnings. It was overwhelming, meticulously curated, and undeniably the work of someone who had not just survived but thrived in secret. Mom's jaw dropped. For a moment, she didn't speak, didn't even breathe audibly. Charlotte's smirk vanished, replaced by a mixture of awe and confusion. Their silence was almost comical. I let it linger, enjoying the shift in energy. "You built all of this?" Mom finally managed, her voice trembling slightly despite herself. I nodded slowly, deliberately. "Yes, I built all of this. And every bit of it was done independently, without interference, without permission, without anyone's approval." Charlotte tried to step forward, clearly trying to assert some dominance. "Well, it's nice, I guess, but—" "No, Charlotte," I said calmly, cutting her off. "This isn't nice. This is proof. Proof that I am independent, capable, and completely self-sufficient. Every dollar you took, every sneer, every manipulation, every expectation you placed on me, it all contributed to this. You tried to make me small, but instead, I used it to fuel myself. And now, this," I gestured around the garage, "is the result." Mom's face went pale, her usual confidence faltering. "Reed, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you weren't paying attention," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "You thought I was dependent, weak, and naive. You thought you could manipulate me forever. But I've been building, Mom. Quietly, consistently, strategically. And today, you're seeing what happens when you underestimate someone." Charlotte opened her mouth again, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. Everything I've done has been done responsibly. Every penny I earned, every hour I spent, was managed with care. And yet, you took what wasn't yours, you undermined me, and you favored her over me for years. This," I gestured to the workshop, "is the culmination of years of your ignorance and my patience. And now, you have to acknowledge it." Mom finally looked at me, the steel in her eyes replaced by a dawning respect, or maybe fear. "Reed, I see," she said quietly. There was no sneer, no dismissive tone, just recognition. I nodded. "Good. Because this isn't just a project. It's my life. And from now on, I make the decisions. I control my finances. I control my space. I control my time. If you want to be involved, you have to respect that. If you don't, then you watch, quietly, and accept it. No interference. No manipulation. No favoritism." Charlotte's expression shifted from confusion to anger, then finally to a grudging acknowledgement. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I knew any word she could throw would crumble under the weight of what I had built. "And just so it's clear," I added, my voice calm but final, "no more taking what isn't yours. No more stealing, borrowing, or manipulating. This is my life now. Your opinions are yours, your actions are yours, but you have no power here. None. I'm done being controlled, undermined, or belittled." The house felt different after that. Mom didn't argue, didn't complain. She didn't try to reassert control or sneer. Charlotte stayed silent, probably processing the enormity of what had happened. The tension, the imbalance of power, the constant manipulation, it was gone. For the first time, I felt what independence truly meant. Not just surviving, not just paying my dues, but being recognized as a capable, self-sufficient adult. I spent the rest of the day quietly organizing, explaining parts of the project to them only as necessary, and answering questions without arrogance, but with complete authority. Every time they tried to overstep, I redirected, calmly and decisively. I realized that the best revenge wasn't shouting, confrontation, or humiliation. It was execution, precision, and undeniable success. By evening, Mom and Charlotte had retreated to the living room, speaking in subdued tones. I returned to the garage, standing in the middle of my creation, and felt a profound sense of peace. Years of frustration, anger, and injustice had led to this moment. I had endured their worst, stayed calm when provoked, and built a future that belonged entirely to me. And now, they had no choice but to see me as I truly was, independent, capable, and untouchable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm light across the workshop, I stepped back and let myself smile. This was more than revenge. This was reclamation. This was proof that patience, planning, and perseverance could dismantle the control of even the most manipulative family. The house, once suffocating, felt like my own for the first time. The garage, once a hidden refuge, had become the symbol of my rise. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't known before. The most powerful revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about proving to yourself that you are unstoppable. And I was.